What if wearing a crown was basically a death sentence? You'd think being royalty means luxury, power, and people bowing at your feet. But throughout history, some of the most powerful people on the planet were taken out in ways so brutal, so shocking, that even Hollywood screenwriters would say that's too much. From ancient Rome to 20th century Russia, thrones have been painted with betrayal. Today, we're breaking down the most horrific royal assassinations ever. And trust me, some of these will haunt you. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. Julius Caesar, the betrayal that started it all. Let's start with arguably the most famous political betrayal in all of human history. March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the Roman Republic, walked into the Senate expecting another day of politics. What he got instead was a conspiracy of 60 senators who had decided he had too much power. As Caesar took his seat, a senator named Tullius Cimber grabbed his toga. That was the signal. Within seconds, senators pulled out concealed daggers and descended upon him. According to ancient historians, Caesar was struck 23 times. 23. He tried to fight back at first, but when he saw Marcus Brutus, a man he considered almost like a son among the attackers, he reportedly pulled his toga over his face and accepted his fate. The famous phrase, "It he too, Brute? Even you, Brutus?" may or may not have actually been said. But what IS confirmed is that only one of those 23 wounds was actually fatal, which means Caesar stood there, being struck again and again, fully conscious for most of it. The irony? The senators claimed they did it to save the Republic. Instead, they plunged Rome into a civil war that ended the Republic forever and gave rise to the Roman Empire. Nice job, guys. Chapter 2. Emperor Caligula. When your own guards turn on you. Stay in Rome for a moment. Let's talk about Caligula. If Caesar was a sympathetic victim, Caligula was, let's say, he earned some enemies. History remembers him as one of the most unhinged rulers to ever live. He allegedly declared himself a living god, supposedly made his horse a senator, though historians debate that one, and terrorized everyone around him with unpredictable cruelty. By January of 41 AD, even his own Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers literally assigned to protect him, had had enough. The plot was led by an officer named Cassius Chaerea, who Caligula had personally humiliated on multiple occasions by mocking his voice and calling him degrading names. Not the smartest move when that person carries a sword for a living. Chaerea and his co-conspirators cornered Caligula in a private passageway beneath the palace after he left the Palatine Games. They struck him down with multiple blows. But they didn't stop there. They also went after his wife Suetonius and their infant daughter. The ancient sources say the baby was killed in the most brutal way imaginable. It wasn't just an assassination. It was the erasure of an entire bloodline in a single afternoon. The Senate initially celebrated, thinking they could restore the Republic. Instead, the Praetorian Guard installed Claudius as the next emperor. History has a cruel sense of humor. Chapter 3. King Edmund Ironside. The ambush from below. Alright, we need to leave Rome and head to medieval England for one of the most bizarre royal endings in history. King Edmund Ironside ruled England in 1016, and his death is so strange that historians still argue about whether it's real or legend. But the story is too wild to skip. Edmund was a warrior king who fought the Danish invader Canute to a standstill. They agreed to split England between them, but someone apparently decided that sharing was an option. According to medieval chroniclers, Edmund met his end through an ambush in the most unexpected and private location imaginable, attacked from below while completely vulnerable and unsuspecting. Let that sink in. Someone allegedly waited in hiding for the king at his most defenseless moment. Whether this account is fully accurate or embellished by medieval writers who love dramatic stories, it tells us something important. When someone wanted a king gone, there was literally no safe place. Edmund was only about 26 years old. After his death, Canute took over all of England and became one of the most powerful rulers in Northern Europe. Chapter 4. King James I of Scotland, trapped in a sewer. Speaking of undignified royal endings, let's head to Scotland. February 1437. King James I of Scotland was staying at a Dominican friary in Perth when a group of conspirators led by Sir Robert Graham, burst in. James had actually been warned about the plot, but he ignored the warnings. Classic, when the attackers arrived, James frantically tried to escape. He pried up floorboards and dropped into a sewer vault beneath the building, hoping to crawl through the drain to safety. But here's the tragic twist. Just days earlier, James had ordered that very drain sealed up because he kept losing tennis balls down there. Tennis balls. He literally sealed his own escape route over a sports equipment inconvenience. Trapped in the sewer with nowhere to go, the conspirators found him and dragged him out. According to accounts, James fought back viciously with his bare hands, but he was unarmed against men with swords. He was struck down with multiple wounds. His queen, Joan Beaufort, tried to intervene and was wounded herself. The aftermath was equally brutal. Sir Robert Graham and the other conspirators were captured and subjected to days-long public punishments so extreme that chroniclers describe crowds turning away in horror. Scotland did not mess around with regicide. Chapter 5. The Princes in the Tower. England's darkest mystery. Now for one that has haunted England for over 500 years. In 1483, 12-year-old King Edward V and his 9-year-old brother Richard, Duke of York, were placed in the Tower of London by their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. He said it was for their protection before young Edward's coronation. That coronation never happened. Richard declared the boys illegitimate and crowned himself King Richard III. And the two princes? They simply vanished. They were last seen alive playing the Tower grounds in the summer of 1483, and then nothing. They were never seen again. The overwhelming historical consensus is that they were eliminated, most likely on Richard's orders or at least with his knowledge. In 1674, workmen demolishing a staircase in the tower discovered a wooden chest containing 2 small skeletons. They were reburied in Westminster Abbey under the assumption they were the princes, though modern requests to conduct DNA testing have been repeatedly denied. What makes this case so chilling isn't just that 2 children were lost, it's the silence around it. No announcement, no trial, no explanation. Just 2 boys who went into a fortress and were never heard from again. The Tower of London has been many things throughout history, but for those 2 children, it was the last thing they ever saw. Chapter 6. Henry IV of France. Attacked in traffic. Let's jump to 1610 Paris. King Henry IV of France was one of the most beloved monarchs in French history. He ended the devastating French Wars of Religion, issued the Edict of Nantes granting religious tolerance, and famously said he wanted every peasant to have a chicken in his pot every Sunday. The people loved him, but not everyone. On May 14, 1610, Henry's royal carriage got stuck in traffic on a narrow Parisian street. A Catholic fanatic named Francois Ravaillac had been stalking the king for weeks, convinced that Henry's religious tolerance was an offense against God. When the carriage stopped, Ravaillac simply climbed up onto a wheel spoke and attacked the king through an open window. The second blow severed a major artery, and Henry collapsed within minutes, right there in his carriage surrounded by his attendants who were powerless to save him. The security failure was staggering. The King of France, out in the open, in a carriage with open windows, stuck in traffic with minimal guards. Ravaillac was immediately seized by the crowd. His subsequent punishment was one of the most severe in French history. Henry's death ended an era of relative peace and set France on a path toward the religious and political tensions that would eventually culminate in the French Revolution. Chapter 7. Tsar Peter III of Russia. Overthrown by his own wife. Russia enters the chat, and oh boy, does Russia deliver. In July 1762, Tsar Peter III was overthrown in a coup orchestrated by none other than his own wife, Catherine. Yes, that Catherine. Catherine the Great. Peter was wildly unpopular. He'd alienated the military by pulling Russia out of the 7 Years' War just as they were winning. He offended the Russian Orthodox Church, and by most accounts he was just not very good at being Tsar. Catherine, on the other hand, was brilliant and ambitious, and had been quietly building alliances with military officers for years. The coup itself was almost bloodless. Peter was forced to abdicate after the military sided entirely with Catherine. He was taken to Ropsha, a small estate outside St. Petersburg, where he was placed under guard. 8 days later, he was dead. The official announcement said he died of hemorrhoidal colic, basically a stomach condition. Nobody believed that for a second. The most likely account is that Alexei Orlov, one of Catherine's key supporters, confronted Peter and things escalated fatally. Orlov himself wrote a letter to Catherine that survives to this day, where he seems to confess that things went too far. Catherine went on to rule for 34 years and became one of the most powerful monarchs in all of European history. Peter became a footnote, literally removed from history by his own spouse. Chapter 8. King Louis XVI, the Revolution's ultimate statement. January 21st, 1793. Paris, a date that changed the world forever. King Louis XVI of France was publicly executed by guillotine in what is now called the Place de la Concorde. While technically an execution following a trial rather than a traditional assassination, the event was a culmination of revolutionary forces that had been targeting Louis for years, and his brutality and symbolic power earned a place on this list. Louis wasn't a tyrant in the classic sense. He was awkward, indecisive, and more interested in locksmithing than governance. But he inherited a France drowning in debt, starving under bread shortages, and seething with class resentment. When the revolution erupted in 1789, Louis tried to navigate it and failed at every turn. His attempted flight to Varennes in 1791 destroyed any remaining public trust. The trial was essentially predetermined. Louis was found guilty of conspiracy against public liberty, and the vote for execution was razor thin. On the morning of his death, Louis reportedly ate a hearty breakfast, attended a final mass, and rode to the scaffold with surprising composure. His last words were an attempt to proclaim his innocence, but the drums were ordered to drown him out. The crowd that gathered numbered in the tens of thousands. When the blade fell, an eerie silence reportedly hung over the crowd for a brief moment before erupting into cheers. Some spectators dipped handkerchiefs as souvenirs. The execution of Louis XVI sent shockwaves across every monarchy in Europe and essentially said, "Kings are not untouchable." That message echoed through the next 2 centuries. Chapter 9. Tsar Alexander II, the bombing they couldn't stop. Back to Russia. March 13th, 1881. Tsar Alexander II was returning from a military inspection in St. Petersburg when a member of the revolutionary group Narodnaya Volya, People's Will, threw a bomb at his carriage. The explosion damaged the carriage and injured several Cossack guards, but Alexander himself was unharmed. He actually stepped out of the damaged carriage to check on the wounded. That decision cost him his life. A second bomber, who had been positioned as a backup, stepped forward and detonated another device right at Alexander's feet. The explosion was devastating. Alexander's legs were shattered, his abdomen was torn open, and his face was disfigured. He was still conscious and reportedly whispered to the palace to die there. When guards reached him, they carried him back to the Winter Palace, leaving a trail across the snow. He was placed on a couch in his study, where his family gathered around him. He died about an hour later. Here's the cruel irony. Alexander II was actually the reformer. He freed the serfs in 1861, modernized the courts, and was literally on the verge of signing a new constitution that would have moved Russia toward representative government. The very morning he was attacked, he had approved the document. His son, Alexander III, tore up and plunged Russia back into autocracy. The revolutionaries wanted progress. They got the exact opposite. Chapter 10. The Romanov family, the end of an empire. We end with the one that might be the most haunting of them all. July 17th, 1918. Yekaterinburg, Russia. Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, along with his wife Alexandra, their 5 children, the family doctor, and 3 servants, were woken in the middle of the night and told to get dressed and go to the basement. They were told they were being moved for their safety because of approaching military forces. When they reached the basement room, Bolshevik Commander Yakov Yurovsky read a brief statement, informing them of their fate. Nicholas barely had time to react before the squad opened fire. But the execution was chaos. The room was small, the shooters were nervous, and this is the part that haunts historians. Several of the children did not fall immediately. The Romanov daughters had sewn diamonds and precious gems into their corsets as a way to smuggle out wealth, and the jewels effectively deflected rounds, prolonging the ordeal. The children reportedly survived the initial volley, and the scene continued for agonizing minutes. The youngest, 13-year-old Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia and was already too weak to walk, was among the last to fall. The remains were then transported to an abandoned mine, treated with acid and buried in secret graves. For decades, the Soviet government denied knowing what happened to the family. The remains weren't discovered and confirmed through DNA testing until the 1990s. The end of the Romanovs wasn't just the end of a dynasty, it was the end of an entire world order. 300 years of Romanov rule, erased in a basement in the middle of the night. Wrap up from the daggers of the Roman Senate to that basement in Yekaterinburg. One thing is brutally clear: a crown has never been a guarantee of safety. If anything, it's been a target. These weren't just political events. They were human tragedies, filled with betrayal, desperation, and consequences that reshaped entire civilizations. What struck you the most? Was it Caesar's final moment of recognition? The vanished princes? The Romanov children? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know which one hit you hardest. If you learned something new today, you also don't want to miss this video, Every Major American War Crime. We're walking through every major conflict where American forces committed acts that violated the laws of war, international conventions, or basic human decency. From frontier massacres of the 1800s all the way to the War on Terror. Over a century of incidents that rarely make it into the textbooks. Watch now and like and subscribe for more dark history.